did you use our preseason top 25 as a metric or a guiding tool in putting this together, or how did you go about finding the answers the way you did?
I did, because I thought it'd be a little silly if I didn't. But also, remember, our preseason top 25 was mine and then yours, and then we averaged them together. And so this allowed me to go back to mine and use mine instead of the combined version of mine and yours. So like, you had Ohio State ranked higher than Oregon in yours. I had Oregon ranked higher than Ohio State in mine. And so like, I made Oregon the Big Ten champ in this one. I said Oregon wins the Big Ten championship again. They're the 2 seed. And I had Ohio State as the 5 seed.
And you used the seeding rules from last year.
I did. Okay. So this could look different. And we can actually, later in the show, we can go over what this would look like if they change the seeding rules, which I suspect they might.
Yeah. Okay. So why don't we take it from the top here? Okay. Let's go 1. Do you want to go 12-1 or 1-12?
Let's go 12-1. We'll do it that way.
Disagree with you, because I think the further you go down, the more interesting it gets.
Okay, we'll go 1-12.
Like, oh, you think
right.
Texas is going to be good? Okay, good one.
Yeah. Okay, we'll go 1-12.
I think that Texas is definitely the team going into the next season. I don't know about you, but like, you always do come up with a path or a favorite in the offseason to be the best team in college football. And I think that now that the Ohio State roster that returned last year is no longer assembled, and we can get into the world where the super team is dead, I think that it's possible that Texas is the closest thing from a roster standpoint to being that left. And now Oregon is another one that I would put into that list, but Oregon is a 2 seed in this here too. So like, I'm not even necessarily all that wound up about who you thought would win these postseason games. I thought the seeding was interesting. Texas, when I did the top 10 returning players for next year list earlier or late last week, Texas had 4 dudes that could have been potentially on that list going into next year. And I know that there's a lot to quibble with when it comes to Arch Manning. I know that people don't love the hype. They want to see more production. But between Ant Hill and Colin Simmons and Ryan Wingo, like, this team, I think CJ Baxter should be healthy and ready to go. Like, they have guys everywhere on both sides of the ball. Like, I think they're going to be the best team in college football coming into next year. And I would anticipate that they would be a favorite going on the road to Columbus and Ohio State early in the season.
So the biggest concern for Texas is the offensive line. They lose 4 starters off the offensive line, but DJ Campbell's back. Cole Hudson's got starting experience. Trevor Gooseby has some starting experience. And it sounds like they're kind of excited about some of these young guys that have been behind some really good players. So, and this is where, one, I like Kyle Flood a lot as an offensive line coach. Most people probably only remember him as the Rutgers head coach, but Kyle Flood is a really experienced offensive line coach, very good at his job. And they've recruited really well at this position. They've developed really well at these positions. And so I'm less worried about them being able to restock that group than I would be for a lot of other schools, because you didn't see them like panic and try to get a bunch of guys out of the transfer portal. They're very confident in what they have. And this is a program that over the last few years, when they've had a hole, they've attacked it aggressively in the transfer portal. And this tells me they don't think they have a hole there.
Yeah, it's really interesting to try to watch the offseason tea leaves, Andy, because it's just like, is it comfortability with what you have or negligence? And like, certain schools, it's been negligence. But I think with Texas, they have proven through their activity through the portal and, of course, their proficiency in putting a roster together from top to bottom that's very good, that it's probably more comfortability. So, and I this is just off the top of my head, but they've done a pretty good job of signing a bunch of really highly touted offensive linemen in the multiple classes since Kelvin Banks signed. So it's not like there's empty cupboard there.
I feel very good about that.
And also they have a quarterback that can exist in a world where the offensive line isn't elite. Even if it starts rocky at the beginning of the year, you have somebody that you can design an offense around that can escape pressure and
he can move around,
and all those things.
you should have where they had a really thin backfield because of injuries this year. You would suspect they're going to have a really deep backfield now. Right. And that'll help too. You're not going to have to worry about, even if guys are taking contact early, you're going to have fresh guys you can put in, and you're going to feel good about that. But I'm not worried about the offensive line being good. Even I think they're going to be good. So plus, they're going to get worked by some of those defensive linemen, and what they see at practice is going to be a lot worse than what they see in most of their games. So I'm excited to see this. It's different, but I just feel like since Steve Sarkisian took over the program, they've done a great job of developing guys, and you see them using the portal less this year than they have in the past. And I think that's interesting too, because it tells you they're really confident in the roster they have.
Well, Andy, also the notion of Texas being back, I think, is interesting, because everybody thinks that being back means winning the national title. And I think being back means consistently a top 5 team. And now we're going on a 3rd consecutive year of them being that. I think that Texas,
and you get through.
But I think it's already okay in a non-ironic way to say that they are back. Like, I think they are.
They're one of the best programs in sport.
Yeah. And it's not like a flare-up year. The way that they have been constructed from the previous 4 years is what makes you say that. It's the consistency of knocking on the door instead of having all these good players and just constantly stinking the way they did for a 15-year period not too long ago. So, it was only 18 months ago where, I predicted that they would make the playoff, and people went freaking berserk because of the notion of like Texas is always overrated. They're perpetually overranked at the beginning of the year and all that stuff. It's like, I think all that crap is dead. And, they were knocking on the door of beating the Ohio State team that won the national title this past year. And you don't do that if you're not a deeply skilled and talented unit. So congrats to Sarkisian. I think that, he has accomplished what he set out to do in being the head coach there. And the only next step at this point now is breaking through, which could take 1 year, it could take 5, but I think eventually they'll do it, because that's what happens when you build teams this good year over year.
All right. So let's go to Oregon. Oregon won the Big Ten this year. I think people who didn't watch them play most of the year, who just saw them get routed in the Rose Bowl, are like, they were a fraud. No, they weren't. They had a really good season. They got beat by the national champions, and that happens. But they're bringing back quite a bit. Now, they've had more to replace. They attacked the transfer portal a lot more aggressively than Texas did, because I think they felt they had to. I don't think they felt like they had as much in the cupboard as Texas did. But they went and got some of the most important guys in the portal. In the offensive line, Isaiah World at left tackle. He was at Nevada. He's aptly named. He's as big as the world, and he's enormous. Emmanuel Pregnon at left guard, who was USC's best returning offensive lineman. He's coming too. Evan Stewart comes back at receiver. You got Dylan Thieneman, the safety from Purdue, who was one of the best defensive backs in the Big 12 or in the Big 10. And now he's there. So I think Oregon.
Andy. I watched Cole Kubelik's video of his top 10 players in the country returning next year. After, because he texted me. He goes, "Hey, our lists are pretty similar." And then he sent me the link to his video. I watched it back. Mekhi Hughes, the running back they got from Tulane who rushed for 1,500 yards, was in his top 10.
It's pretty good.
Like, as somebody who has watched a lot of G5, this kid can run and is really, really good. If you throw somebody like that into this team, holy crap.
Because Noah Whittington probably isn't RB1. He probably doesn't ascend to that with Jordan James gone. Mekhi Hughes probably jumps into that. And I just think
265 carries, 1,400 yards, 15 touchdowns, 5.3 yards a carry last year.
That'll work. That's pretty good. Pretty good. We've seen him go through a whole season undefeated. They can do it again. And look, you got to win in the playoff. Like, you can't keep getting there and not doing anything. But again, they got a pretty tough draw. If the seeding rules changed, it probably helps them a little bit. So
I think that them losing the way that they did probably puts a sour taste in a lot of people's mouths. But I also feel like you can't draw too many conclusions of one game. Sometimes things just snowball on you. They probably played Ohio State at the worst possible time. Probably even harder to play Ohio State where they did than even Texas or Notre Dame, because it was kind of just like they were still fresh and, winding up or gearing up to prove the world wrong. And like the truth is that they're not going to play anybody next year that is was nearly as deep or talented as Ohio State was last year, including Ohio State. So that's the thing too. Like with this bracket, it's like Notre Dame had to play Ohio State, Tennessee had to play Ohio State, Oregon had to play Ohio State. Like they don't have to play Ohio State next year. That Ohio State.
2 faves for just $7. It's got to be Wendy's. You remember the super value menu? You remember the Biggie Bag? I had a lot of Biggie Bags back in the day. This is the next generation of that. Choose any 2 of these 4 items for just $7. Your spicy chicken sandwich, the quarter pound Dave single, the classic chicken sandwich, or 10-piece nuggs. 16 different combinations, all delicious. You can make a hot poultry power couple with a spicy chicken sandwich and spicy buffalo nuggs. You can go double beef with 2 Dave singles. Create your ultimate duo today in the Wendy's app. 2 faves for $7. It's got to be Wendy's. Terms apply.
Right. And like it's an interesting thought as we work down this bracket here, Andy, now to go to your 3 seed, which would be Clemson. And I know you're high on them.
Yes. Now, Clemson would not be the number 3 team. So
right.
If they change the seeding rules, if they change the seeding rules, I would probably have Clemson seeded about 8 or 9. But I am high on Clemson. And Ari, we've talked about this a lot of times already on the show. Hiring Tom Allen as a defensive coordinator. Get some new ideas. Don't be so insular. I think that matters for Dabo. I think they'd gotten a little bit too insular. You bring back Cade Klubnik. You've got those receivers who are very good as freshmen who I think will take another step. Defensively, you've got dudes like Peter Woods is awesome. Peter Woods is going to be one of the best defensive linemen in the country. Sammy Brown, like your secondary is good. You've got NFL guys in your secondary. So they are now doing the things that we said they needed to do. Did they go into the transfer portal like Lane Kiffin does? No. Did they go into the transfer portal and get guys to fill spots they needed? Yes, they got some depth at receiver. They got some depth on the D line. They got an edge rusher. Like that's how you do that. And
the presumption
they already
is
had good players.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. The presumption with Clemson is that they don't need to do it the way that Ole Miss did it. What they need to do is like 2 years ago when Keon Coleman was around, be big enough to say, hey, we don't have good enough receivers, and then go get somebody who you can plug in. So I think that the perception here, or my understanding is that they feel pretty good about their roster overall because Dabo's done a very good job of scouting, recruiting, evaluating, and developing to go get players that can help where their weak points are. I mean, if you look at the way that this team is constructed, a lot of people are very high on Cade Klubnik, including yourself, maybe a little bit higher than I am. But you team them together with Antonio Williams and Bryant Wesco, and then you have Peter Woods and TJ Parker on the defensive line. 2 really good linebackers coming back, bringing in Will Helt from Purdue. Like they have guys at every level of both sides of the football. So, and then also too, you have to, I don't know about you, but I haven't like lost my affinity or my respect for Dabo as it pertains to his ability to develop and evaluate players. So even guys that haven't really stormed onto the scene yet, I think you need to have a wild card spot for Clemson next year of like, here's 2 dudes that we're not talking about and won't talk about much in the offseason who actually turn out to be like potential top 3 round picks, because that always every year that happens. And I think that Antonio Williams is a very underrated player. He got lost in the
Antonio Williams could be a massive star. Like
and he gets lost because he wasn't Jeremiah Smith or Ryan Williams last year, but like he has the tools as in the physical traits to be one of the household names in our sport next year. So like I don't.
We may look back on that receiver class of 2024 and just be like, this is insane. Yeah.
What was in the water?
Yeah, this is just amazing. So I'm very excited about Clemson, and I do think this is not because they're seated higher than they would be doesn't mean I don't think that like this team could make some noise in the playoff. I think this team just
also could be a top 5 team.
Regardless of the seeding rules. Yes, that's true. They could be the 3 seed because they're number 3 in the country, depending on how things go this season.
Okay, so 4 was Lord be with you on this one because it's the Big 12 champion. How did you arrive at BYU?
Well, BYU brings back almost everybody from a team that came very close to winning the Big 12 title this year. Their biggest issue is they lose 3 starting offensive linemen, but it is BYU. They very rarely are without talent on the offensive line, but that most of the defense comes back. Jake Ratzlaff is back. LJ Martin is back. You've got a good chunk of the receiving core is back. Like Chase Roberts decided to come back. So like this is going to be a fun team to watch. And it's an experienced team that's played a lot of big games and probably is sitting there going, we could have been the Big 12 champs this year. One or two things goes differently, and we're in the playoff already. And so there's a lot of, hey, it didn't go the way we wanted to. We're running it back, and we're going to get it right this time.
Well, the thing with BYU is that a few things could have gone the other direction, and they could have been way out of the playoff. They were a team that were kind of walking a tightrope all year.
The Utah game,
there's a certain level of like, okay, you know, like the Jesse Pinkman, he can't keep getting away with this. Like for a while there, it looked like BYU was going to go undefeated in the regular season and winning games in a way that would make your jaw drop. I think that they probably wound up somewhere when the law of averages kind of
about where they should have been,
about where they should have been. But like if you think like first of all. Jake Ratzlaff is going to be a top 7 quarterback returning next year overall. And you put that in the Big 12 with a bunch of experienced talents. And of course, Kalani Sitake, very underrated coach. And I think that it's very easy to overlook BYU's coaching staff because they don't really play the same game that everybody plays in terms of how they assemble their roster. They're obviously beholden to, a certain number of players of the Mormon faith. And, they're looking for a lot of those
players are going to serve. Well, a lot of those players are going to serve missions before they come play.
Yeah, or if you are trying to get somebody who isn't a Mormon, they have to be okay with the lifestyle there. Like to make a team as good as BYU was last year, and then for them to all come back and try to run it back, like assembling a roster as good as BYU at a place that has as many limitations as BYU is kind of, I gotta say, probably one of the. I mean, we should do this in the offseason. Like, what are the 5 hardest obstacles or places with the most obstacles that you could face as a head coach? I'm sure BYU probably, from an academic standpoint and a religious standpoint, is probably in the top 3. I think being a MAC head coach would be the hardest thing in all of sports or the entire sport because, like, it's hard to differentiate yourself from the others. But holy crap, he's done a really good job. So that's a plus in the can BYU reach there. And also, too, like, they don't have to go 8-0 next year.
No,
you have to win the conference, and I think you can win the conference at 9-3. Like this isn't like they have to be perfect again. So, and I think that Colorado should still be pretty tough.
Arizona State with Sam Levitt back,
it's going to be tough.
But Baylor into the season very hot. Texas Tech into the season very hot. These are teams that you got to work. And like, what if
the Big 12
comes back? Yeah,
the Big 12, dude. There's 7 teams that you could pick from, and like you could have put any of the top 8 there in the conference standings in that spot. And
by the way, BYU's bitter in-state rival, which gave them a hell of a game last year, Utah. Like, do we really expect Kyle Whittingham's team to be down 2 years in a row? I don't. Like, it hasn't really ever happened in the past. Yeah,
so they were banged up last year.
Yeah. So I mean, that's another one, but it's tough picking a Big 12 champ, but I went with the team that had the most coming back.
So far, there's nothing I disagree with. Like when I'm doing mine, like I got to figure out a way to be different because I don't hate anything.
Well, you can pick a different Big 12 champ. That's an easy one. Also, I think the Miami fans are probably pretty upset that I only have one ACC team in here, and it's Clemson because there's a good chance the ACC gets 2 in again. So I think that's something to consider as you're doing yours.
With the playoff too, Andy, is that you have to be beholden to conference champions in a way that we never had to before. But also too, it's very hard to predict which teams are going to pick up an extra loss in the non-conference that have nothing to do with where they're seated right now.
Exactly. And like Miami plays Notre Dame in Florida in the non-conference. Like, so we don't know where that's going to come out.
Like Miami could have the same exact season it had last year, next year,
and get in
and make the playoff. Like it's all circumstance based on what everyone else is doing. So like it's like that's what's difficult about this. I think 10-2, you know, was almost good enough already. And like that's the thing. It's like how do you think it's going to play out?